Hi, everybody. It's Donna Reed. I'm in Tucson, Arizona, and I'm calling this the Cactus Lounge, even though you don't see one cactus behind me. Paul Cole will get on me for that, Penny. He's like, "Where's the cactus?" So, um, I am Donna Reed, and I traveled in 76A, and you almost all know that, so I might have just repeated myself. My guest today is Penny, and I'm going to say Ronning. Do you pronounce it with?
Yep,
Okay, I didn't know if
correct.
it was a
Right,
long O
that's
or a
correct.
short O.
Mhm.
Penny, tell everybody where you are, when you first traveled, and are you living in the same place that you were when you interviewed and all of that?
I actually am.
Okay.
But there's been a long distance in between when I left and then when I returned. So I am in Billings, Montana, which is where I interviewed with a Cast C. I think they were Cast C in 1982. And I interviewed at the end of November in 1982.
Okay.
At that time, I was actually going to school at Arizona State University, but I was home for a holiday break and my
Wow.
parents were on vacation. So I was here to take care of my dog, to watch my parents home. And Up With People had come through on a Wendy's tour, a private Wendy's tour. And so I thought, hey, I'm just going to host two cast members
Oh,
while I'm here, which I
so,
did.
okay, wait, I just have to interject. Okay, so
Yeah.
had you heard of Up with People prior to that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. My
Okay.
family had hosted since 1970.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know they did a Wendy's tour. I knew there were a
Yeah.
lot of tours. I know the General Electric. I know a lot of them, but I didn't know. Was there a special song for the Wendy's tour like there was for some of the others? Do you know?
I don't remember. There may have been, but I don't remember. And it was actually a tour that was specifically, it was a gratitude tour for all the Wendy's employees in Montana.
Oh
And
my gosh.
yeah, the owners of the different Wendy's
Franchise.
franchises in the state brought Up With People, if I'm remembering correctly, brought Up With People as a message of gratitude to all of their employees.
That's very
So yeah,
cool.
so the cast came, and like I said, it was the end of November,
Okay.
and I was just here in Montana on a holiday break, taking care of my dog and my parents' home, and had these two cast members that stayed at the house, and they convinced me to interview. I was like, ah, sure, why not? And I didn't know anything about a cast E. I knew A, B, C, D. I didn't know anything about a cast E.
Right, right,
So in my mind, it was, June through July.
right.
So I interview, and the next day, as I'm dropping the cast members off to get on the bus to go to the next city, the cast director of that cast comes to me and says, "Want you to know that you've actually been accepted. You're going to be getting a call from Mike Knowles." And I was like, "Oh, that's nice. Thank you so much." And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of exciting." So I did. I got a call from Mike Knowles, and he told me I was accepted, and I was excited about that. And still in my mind, I'm thinking
Next
June.
summer.
Yeah, next summer. And then he says, "So when do you think you'll be able to get here in January?" And he tells me the date um that the cast will start. And I was like, "January? Isn't it June?" And he said, "No, you've been accepted for casting in January." So I literally had to get back to Arizona, close out my schooling in Arizona, close out my apartment, everything where I was living,
Wow.
pack it all, drive it back to Montana, and then turn around and drive back to
Back
Tucson, drive to Tucson.
for the staging. Oh my gosh. Okay,
Yeah.
who is the cast director that you interviewed with? Do you remember or that told
I
you?
don't, I can picture her, but I don't remember her name.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I think it was Cassie, and it would have been 1982. I think it was Cassie. That's what's staying with me. Could have been Cass B, but that's what's
Sometimes
staying
when these
with
are
me.
posted, the people remember like, oh, we were there,
Yeah,
and stuff like that. So
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
sort of fun. That's amazing. I love hearing the stories because in my mind, they came to town, they did a show, I interviewed, I got a letter, I went next summer. It all felt very like by the book, whatever that means
Right,
for Up with People. Oh my
right,
God, that's just
right.
so funny.
Yeah,
And
and what was really funny too is when I get down to Tucson at our host family in Tucson, in walks Mary Summers, who was part of my cast, and sadly she's now deceased.
Mm.
But in walks Mary Summers, who I had been in a tap dancing class with at Montana State University, which is where I had been going to school prior to ASU. And then walks in Gina Hempel, which she and I were lived on the same dorm in Manzanita at Arizona State University.
Oh my
So my
gosh.
introduction as a cast member to Up with People, I felt like I was just going home.
I already know
Like
these
I already
people.
know these people, this is
Oh
awesome. I
my,
already know these people. Yeah,
oh my gosh, that's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it
and I
was.
can't imagine. Do you remember, okay, this is like a nosy question financially. What tuition was, and did you have to come up with just a semester at a time, or how did you do
It was
that?
$5,000 for the entire year.
5,000 for the year. That was 83. We were
Yeah.
3,900, I think, in 1976
Mhm.
for the
Yeah,
year. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. 5,000.
I this is totally off of the charts here, but there's a local group here on Facebook, like there is everywhere, and somebody was looking for childcare, and it worked out to 12.50 an hour for these two, and there were people complaining that wasn't enough. And I was like, I'm old. I got $1.50 for three kids with
Oh
no
yeah.
training at all, you know? I'm just
Oh yeah, I know. It's changed dramatically. It
yeah,
has. It
yeah.
has changed dramatically.
Too
Yeah.
funny. So
Yeah.
did you travel just the 1 year, or did you travel more than 1 year?
I did 1 year.
Okay.
And we may get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that 1 year was plenty.
Oh,
And
okay.
it was um it I love Up with People, and I've been a dedicated alumni.
Right.
But that one cast year was incredibly challenging. And mainly because it was so different from what I was expecting
Oh,
Up with People to be. Uh,
okay.
as I shared with you, my family had hosted Up with People since 1970. And I was used to seeing Up with People as a community type empowerment organization, human rights type thing, um, a cultural exchange.
Yeah.
I really saw the people aspect of it, and that's what I loved, those relationships, the connection.
Yeah.
And I got accepted into a cast that was about recording a live album and doing all of the
Oh.
production material for that next show.
What was going to start? What was the show? What was the
It was just called Live, Stand
live?
Together Live. And so
Okay.
this was the first cast album that Up With People had recorded in a long time, first live cast album.
Okay.
And so this particular cast was just packed with talent. And boy, did we had extraordinary singing talent, extraordinary stage talent. And the entire first semester was about the show. So we
Okay.
were constantly restaging the show. New songs were being introduced, things were being recorded, commercials were being filmed. We were
Oh,
doing
wow.
television shows in Los Angeles. It was the first semester was just show oriented. We
Production.
did very little community engagement, and it was a challenge,
Interesting.
and
Not,
when you have a lot of talent competing for
yeah.
those spots, and the focus is who's on stage, who's up front, who's at the microphone. It created a dynamics within our cast, which for cast
Mm,
members like me, who wasn't, I was not show oriented, it became a challenging place to be.
yeah.
And I was extraordinarily unhappy. And I love my cast now. We are very, very close. We became close as a cast after Up with People.
You know, so having done a number of these now, so I interviewed during 75, 76, so the bicentennial when they were
Yeah.
just nonstop, all over the place, all over the place, all over the place. And those people too. And then you know Caleb because of his
Yes.
cast being up there.
Yeah.
And they were 1 week in a place, right?
Yes.
And the community service piece was really, really preeminent
Yes.
in that part in their tour. Not to mention getting to know their host families, you know.
Right. Right.
a little bit more. And I was telling somebody about this the other day. I don't remember where I was. Had no idea. I've known them for a long time, and I said, "Yeah, when I was young, and I traveled with that international singing group." I was like, "What?" And then you have to go into the kind of explanation of it, which is
Mhm.
always like what's your elevator speech about up with
Right,
people,
right.
and and the number of people that I have interviewed over these last couple of years who speak of the service piece
Yes.
is phenomenal. And when I just talked to the three that did the Kosovo thing, it was so important for them. And then Brad, obviously.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
all the years that he's traveled, he had to have seen a change in that, right? And the
Yeah.
growth, because for me, we did some, but I felt like singing at a mental institution or a prison was our community service. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? We
Right.
didn't do as much as what. So that's super interesting. Okay, so
Right.
you leave college, you go to Up with People. Did you come back to Arizona State then, or what'd you do?
Uh, no. My parents actually moved to Arizona during my year of travel,
Okay,
and so I didn't return home to Montana. I returned to Arizona,
okay,
uh, and it was, I returned to the Scottsdale, Arizona, and I had been going to school at Arizona State.
right.
But I ended up, I needed to recover from that year
Yeah,
because I did leave the year angry. I left
okay,
people very angry, disillusioned. Uh, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. And
okay.
um, I ended up actually becoming a flight attendant.
Oh, wow.
And so moved out to Los Angeles and became a flight attendant for the next 10 years. And I loved the travel. I loved
Yeah.
that part about Up with People. I loved the different cultures. And so yeah, I lived in Los Angeles and my roommates in LA were my Up with People cast members.
Oh my
And
gosh.
which was awesome. And that's when like I said, so many of us became really close friends after Up with People.
Yeah.
And those roommates are some of those individuals that I became very close with afterwards.
When I mentioned Caleb, part of what he had said to me at his 5-year reunion is everybody has their idea of who they want to have come. And I said, you're going to find that some of the people that you were not close to when you travel become your best friends as the years go by. And
Absolutely.
others that you thought were going to be best friends, you won't see them or hear from them for 40 or years. And he's
Yes.
just now, they're at 10 or 11 years out, he's just realizing that and being
Yeah.
in Denver, connecting to, he was a cast member and older than most of the staff,
Yep.
but
Yep.
those are his friends that he hangs with and who he's been introduced to.
Yeah.
So how long then were you a flight attendant before you wound back up in Montana? What all transpired in those years? Can you do that in like 3 minutes? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was a flight attendant for 10 years and flew all over the world and even had some of my cast members and their families who ended up on my flights.
That's so fun.
And it was always so fun when they would either come on board or one of my close friends from our year, I was at that time what was called either the first flight attendant or the flight manager, and so I'm making the announcements. And one of the flight attendants comes up and hands me this note written on a barf bag,
Yeah.
an air sickness bag. And I'm and I'm reading the note. And then I realized it was one of my good friends who had been on her honeymoon. We were in Greece. We were
Oh my
flying
God.
passengers out of Greece, and she had been on her honeymoon. And so she and her now new husband were on my flight. And
Oh
so
my.
things like that would happen. And it was always so much fun. And it was always somewhere randomly in the world,
Uh-huh.
which I loved.
Yeah,
And
me too.
yeah, absolutely loved that. And that still happens, which I love. Uh, but no, after I had flown for 10 years, it was never the dream job that I had wanted.
Mm,
I'd always wanted to attend USC Film School, but growing up in Montana as a creative kid, that was not encouraged. Creativity was not encouraged. What was
mm.
encouraged when I was growing up were the occupations and the education of which you could get a job. And since I
Right.
was female, I was pushed in the direction of nursing, psychology, teaching, things that were more designated as female type
Women's jobs.
occupations.
Yeah.
Yeah, of which I had absolutely no interest at all and no skill set for that whatsoever. And and so when I was interviewing with my high school guidance counselor and telling him that I had always wanted to go to USC Film School, he reached across the desk, patted my hand, and said, "That's a nice dream, but let's talk about what you're going to do for a living." So I had,
Holy cow.
and that was actually why I was at Arizona State initially, is because
Wow.
I thought I had to go to school for a living, and I needed to get an education that would teach me something I could do for a living.
Right.
And I had gone with a friend of mine from high school down to Arizona State, thinking that that's where I was supposed to be. And I was
Right.
actually miserable. And what I loved, the things that I loved about Up With People, and I will also share that at that time when you and I traveled, cast members went out on PR.
Yeah.
And we were the ones that went out and set up the show.
Yep.
And I I was one of those cast members that was constantly sent out on Up With People, or set out on
Yeah.
PR. I was actually gone from the cast 105 days.
Holy
When
cow.
you think about the year, I did Up With People I did
A third
promotion
of it.
105 days exactly.
Wow.
So it was actually very few cast members that I got to know and that got to know me because I wasn't with many people for a
Wow.
long period of time. I was constantly coming and going.
Yeah.
One of the things that I shared at the last reunion I was at, in which some of us were asked to address Blanton Belk and the Caldwell brothers. And one of the things that I talked about with Blanton's legacy is for him to understand the leaders he developed and the
Mm.
leaders the Up With People program created and really developed within us a seed of leadership at a young age. And just in my cast alone, those of us that were sent out from staging to do PR in the Southern California area. So we were the ones that were sent out the very first week of staging. And it's a brand new show. We didn't even know the show. We had no idea what the songs were. We had
Wow.
no idea what the show looked like. We knew nothing. And we knew very few of these cast members, but we're sent out to do PR. And we're all in our young 20s. But of that group, it was extraordinary what that group went on to do in their occupations. And I don't have the list in front of me, but by memory, Betsy Myers, she went on to become the chief operating officer of President Barack Obama's national campaign, his
Right.
historic campaign in 2008. She served in the Clinton administration in the White House. She was part of leading women in small business. She's been an extraordinary leader within
Hmm.
our country. Crystal Notek, she went on to become the senior vice president of Northwest and then Delta Airlines.
Wow.
Nan Erb, she went on here. She was an American citizen who went on to become a European attorney. There were so many of us in that first set of students that were sent out, cast members that were sent out to do PR that became leaders at a national level or an international level. And I think back, Judy Ford, one of them, Judy Ford went on to be the president of Quest in the state of
Wow.
Oregon and has done extraordinary things within her career. And she and I have talked about that, as have Betsy and I and Crystal and I. We've talked about what that meant being sent out at an early age, having to promote a show, create something out of nothing. And you're there with, I was fortunate to have been with Mara Siegel. She was,
Oh, yeah.
she
Nice.
was the staff member that I was sent out with. And so, and Maris and I are still friends today. But the leadership skills that PR provided us in long-term career on our long-term career path, that's nothing in my opinion that a college education could have done.
So let me ask you a question related to this because I go round and round with it related to my own life because I'm from a town of 500 people.
Mhm.
And I think mom and dad thought I'd go to Up With People and come back home, right?
Mhm.
And a few years ago, I arranged a reunion of my little class of 26 people from Tucson, even though 10 of them still live in Ohio and could have done it there. And then they teased me and they called me bossy. And I'm
Mhm.
like, no, 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 it's leadership. It's not
Right,
bossy. It's the reason,
right.
and there's a joke about it. So if you think back on who you young women were, because it was all women that you
Right.
just mentioned, do you feel like even coming just from high school or whatever, that that seed of being a strong female and a leader was there and it was just
Yes,
accelerated because of the situation related to Up With People? Or do you,
yes,
yeah,
yeah, yes, absolutely, I do. But I also, yes. And just like when you're in staging where Lynn Morris is looking at the dancers, you also had those staff members looking at who could hold their own on a speaking stage,
right.
who could sell out a show, who would know how to go talk to business leaders.
Yeah.
You also had that set of staff looking at how you were interacting, what your social norms were. Uh, and yes, and when especially when I think back at the names that I said as well,
Yep.
and knowing the families that they came from, we all came from families with very strong mothers, and
Mm.
and how our mothers were leaders within our families, and that we also had fathers um, that promoted our leadership as well. Now, that may not have been, there were still the social norms of where women, where
Oh, yeah.
females fit in to the social structure. That was still in place. But each one of us, I think, definitely had, we had
Had
strong,
something in you
we had
already.
strong role models at home
Yeah.
within the mothers that we had.
That to me is also just interesting. I have all brothers and all sons, and my mom was very much a stay-at-home mom when I was young.
Mhm.
And but what when people say, "Well, did your parents say this or did your parents say that?" I'm not good at remembering anything specific. All I
Mhm.
remember that is that I was told to do my best, whatever it was.
Mhm.
They didn't say you're a woman you should or you're a woman you can't or what, whatever. It was just whatever you decide, do your best. And
Right.
that I hear perpetually in my head. And it is the reason that I think that I now, it's taken me 60 some years, can
Mhm.
recognize when I've said yes to too many things
Mhm.
because then it's not my best, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have limits.
Right.
So you get back home. I don't know when you're back home to Montana. And did you and I meet on the BOG? Is that when
We
we met?
did. Yes, we served on the Board of Governors together.
I'm
Yes.
like, what were we doing when we met? I was trying.
And I actually did remember that until you just said that. I
Yeah,
was like, yes, that is as actually when
yeah.
I was thinking we met at a reunion or something.
Well, and that's
But no, it
possible
was. We served on the board.
but we were
Yes,
on
you're
the board
right.
of governors.
Right,
Yes.
right, right.
That's funny, which was great for me because of having traveled only 1 year and being from a small town and being during
Yeah.
the bicentennial, we didn't have a very international group. So I've loved getting to know people across the generations. Oh, we have 10 minutes. Okay. So you're back in Montana. How long have you been back in Montana and what have you been doing? I do see politics in
Yes.
some of your posts and things like
Right.
that. You've been very active in I don't know whether the whole state or just your hometown.
Uh, yes to both of those. Yeah, I grew up in a family that, well, my mom was a career federal employee,
Okay.
and my dad was the owner operator of a restaurant. So I grew up in a very socially engaged family with strong work ethics. But
Yeah.
from a very early age, my mom was the one who really taught my sister and I that politics is not about an ideology. Politics is about policy making and what we believe are fair laws and what we believe are just laws.
Hmm.
And so my mom was a great example of that, as was my dad. But my mom was definitely the one that was more involved simply because of the job that she had. And so I've been actively involved in in politics and policy making for, gosh, I don't even know a time when I wasn't involved, when I think about it. Uh, but yeah, so I've served in elected office in my community, and I've written legislation at the state level, and thankfully the legislation and policy that I've written at the state level, it's passed. So it's now state law. And that all is in regard to human trafficking and the things that I work um, on those issues. So I started a nonprofit organization back in 2016 addressing human trafficking, both at
Wow.
the state level as well as the national level. I now work, still oversee that organization and work at the national level on federal policy.
Wow.
In 2022, ran for the United States House of Representatives in Montana. So have been very active politically at both at the local level, the state level, and the national level.
Penny, can I just say that living in Tucson, so I'm from Ohio, been in
Mhm.
Tucson now 24 years, so the Mexico border. I don't think of Montana at all about a human trafficking state. Like to me, I just think of these random few rural, not huge cities and the big open sky, right? So that's a fascinating arena that I think that you're in, based on my thoughts
Of
about
what
how
human
I perceive.
trafficking is. Of what human
Yeah,
trafficking is. Yeah.
yeah.
I'm the daughter of a trafficking survivor. My
Wow.
mom was trafficked in rural South Dakota in the early 1940s. Human
Wow.
trafficking is not a new crime. This crime has been with us, really since the beginning of time.
Was that East Coast thing coming west where they sent children
No.
west? Okay.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. So human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel an individual into commercial sex acts or labor against their will. That's the
Okay.
federal law of human trafficking. But we didn't get that federal law and that language of human trafficking until the year 2000. So when we think of the crime human trafficking, we don't often think of what the federal law says
Right.
by force, fraud, or coercion. What we think of as human trafficking, we may have worded it prior as child abuse, child sexual abuse. But when my mom was trafficked, there were no words called child sexual
Right. They
abuse,
didn't even
child
have stuff
abuse,
for it.
trauma, trauma-informed care. There wasn't anything like that. The only thing that Donna, you and I, that my mom and victims within my mom's generation and prior and within our generation, and for too long since, the only thing they've had when it comes to crimes of sexual violence has been, shh, don't say
Right.
anything.
Right.
There's been such a stigma of what crimes of sexual violence bring. But what we see within our rural communities is human nature is human nature in rural communities, just like it is in urban
In a big
areas.
city, you know.
And so human trafficking is simply the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person into commercial sex acts.
Wow.
So if a child or a vulnerable person is sold for anything of value, that could be 5 cents, it could be a reduction in a rent payment, it could be shelter, it could be clothing, it could be drugs, anything of value. It doesn't
It's
matter
considered.
what the value is either.
Wow.
It can be a very low value to a very high value. That's a commercial sex act, and that is human trafficking.
You
So,
should you
yeah.
should present on this at one of the reunions. Have they ever talked to you about doing that?
No, and I would love to. I actually just I received it kind of it makes me laugh, and I'm so grateful. Don't misunderstand this. That I'm incredibly grateful that I got one of the McLennan
Yeah.
Awards.
Yeah.
And I'm very grateful. But the McLennan Awards are for acts of kindness, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I guess it's an act of kindness. But my work, I put people in prison, so
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I get the really bad people off the streets and I put them in prison. We help victims and things like that as well. But for
Yeah.
me, I get rapists off the streets. I work to get traffickers put in prison and buyers of commercial sex in prison. And I write to change laws to protect our children online so they can't be found by a child
Yeah.
predator. And then I work to get that child predator put into prison. So,
Wow.
and I'm really proud of the work that we've done. I would absolutely love that. If there's anyone
Yeah.
out there, I would love to present on that because that's what I do.
Yeah. I'm
Now,
gonna
okay.
I have to wrap this up
Yeah,
because I just have to, but I'm gonna suggest a couple of things. One is as they plan for these reunions, they are talking about speakers who might be of interest. Now the next two are in Limerick. Um, and I don't know all the details of that, but I certainly can connect you. And then I also think it might be interesting since I've done now a few of these group interviews if two or three of the others from your cast, who you have just mentioned, Betsy's name had been given,
yeah,
if we did one of these with three or four who traveled together who have become leaders, because I think that could be a really interesting group conversation. And I have,
absolutely.
I
Yeah.
have kept these to 40 minutes, my free Zoom, because I don't think most people want to listen for an hour or two.
Mhm.
But when we're done here, I'm gonna go back to Facebook Messenger and I'm
Yeah.
gonna
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I would yeah, when I think about my cast, I told you
yeah,
Gina, granddaughter of Jesse Owens, and Gina's an
yeah,
Emmy award-winning television producer. Mara Siegel, yeah, I mean, you have seen what she and Ken have been doing.
yeah.
Betsy Myers. Yeah, there's so many
Your
that,
volume is going way, way, way down all of a
oh, I,
sudden.
I don't know why that would be.
Well,
Uh,
we're getting to the
yeah.
end anyway.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's it. But yeah, I'm really proud of our cast. And like I've said, our cast has become very close. And I'm really proud of the fact that at the 50-year reunion in Orlando, our cast was the one that had the most cast members attend. And
Oh, nice.
and we were the ones who won the presidential suite. So I'm
Woo!
really proud of our cast and how close we have become. We are a family.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I used to end these by asking people what they would say to potential new travelers. Interestingly, Mike Knowles has presented some ideas to people. I'll have to tell you about that,
Oh, good.
about what a future could look like, whether it was called up with people or not. But thank you for agreeing to do this. And if you have a minute when I click off,
I'll stay on. Yes.
I'm going to go back to Messenger and maybe call you on there and talk a little bit about it. Thank you for all the
Yeah.
work that you're doing. I am not really politically active, so I tend to not be aware.
Mhm.
And I appreciate people like you who put the time and energy into figuring things out that isn't the way my brain works
Yeah.
because it takes a
Yeah.
village, takes all of us.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm just going to say a couple of things real quickly. Up with people, I often hear alumni say Up with People was not political. I would share with you that Up with People was highly political, especially when we traveled because of where the money came from
Mm,
and where we performed. We performed in front of political leaders.
there we did. Yeah,
We stayed with political leaders in host family settings. Blanton
yeah,
Belk was very much a political figure in that not a political figure of running for office, but he was very outspoken in who he did run with
that's true.
and who he aligned with.
Yeah.
We just have to change the way we look at politics.
All right, I gotta stop, and
Yeah.
then I'm gonna go to Facebook. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Penny.
Donna. Thanks,
Perfect.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.